Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Brath Wang. Kamala Harris and her opponent Donald Trump had their first debate on September 10th, but only 10 minutes in, things got heated quickly and turned right into Taiwan. Joining us today to discuss this are Kharis Templeman, Standford University Hoover Institution Project on Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific Program Manager and Research Fellow, Chen Fang-yu, Soochow University Political Science Assistant Professor. A very warm welcome to both on the show today. Let's first take a look at how Kamala Harris and Donald Trump traded barbs on Taiwan.
Under Donald Trump's presidency, he ended up selling American chips to China to help them improve and modernize their military, basically sold us out, when a policy about China should be in making sure the United States of America wins the competition for the 21st century, which means focusing on the details of what that requires, focusing on relationships with our allies, focusing on investing in American-based technology so that we win the race on AI, on quantum computing, focusing on what we need to do to support America's workforce so that we don't end up having, on the short end of the stick, in terms of workers' rights. But what Donald Trump did, let's talk about this, with COVID, is he actually thanked President Xi for what he did during COVID. Look at his tweet. Thank you, President Xi, exclamation point, when we know that Xi was responsible for lacking and not giving us transparency about the origins of COVID.
President Trump, I'll let you respond.
First of all, they bought their chips from Taiwan. We hardly make chips anymore because of philosophies like they have and policies like they have.
Trump refuted Harris, implying again that Taiwan took away the U.S. chip business and accusing the Biden administration of allowing that to happen. This is despite moves in the Biden administration to boost domestic chip manufacturing, as we've seen with the TSMC plant in Arizona. I'll first turn to you, Kharis. With Trump words being increasingly transactional on Taiwan, if he becomes president come January, what is the fate of Taiwanese chips?
Well, I think it's uncertain. I think we have the example of a first Trump administration where they actually deepened the connections with Taiwan and encouraged both sides to engage in greater diplomatic and economic exchanges. But Trump is also, as you noted, quite transactional in his approach to foreign policy. And it's not obvious that he will continue the Biden administration's chip policies.
But looking at his team, do you feel that they would be more friendly or more warm to increasing cooperation with Taiwan as we see a delegation coming in Taiwan as we speak?
I think it, again, is uncertain. The biggest variable in this election is what a Trump 2.0 administration would look like, who would be in it, and what he himself would prioritize in his policies. And there's a mixed message really coming from the Trump administration towards Taiwan.
Fang-yu, turning to you, the Biden administration has been pushing for the CHIPS Act and moving TSMC or expanding TSMC manufacturing capabilities into the United States. If Harris becomes president in January, do you feel there will be a change in that, or do you feel it will exacerbate cooperation, or where some in Taiwan fear that Taiwanese chip technology is moving outside of Taiwan?
Well, first of all, I think that there will be a continuity if the Vice President Harris wins, because I think every policy seems to be very similar to the Biden administration. After all, she is the Vice President right now. So I don't think there will be any major changes, especially the economy and the Indo-Pacific strategy. So everything will be very similar. That is first. And secondly, I think for the U.S., I mean, from the first Trump administration and the Biden administration, the goal is, I think, also very similar, that both presidents want to bring the manufacturers back to the U.S. So that is very similar, but the approach is a little bit different. So, for example, the Trump administration just asks more directly from the allies and to ask more directly for the investment. But the Biden administration just have more bills to maybe provide subsidies and have an industrial policy. I think The U.S. has no, I mean, the industrial policy has no, very long-term absent in the U.S. government or the U.S. Politics. So this is maybe the first try that there's so much a big-scale industrial policy.
We'll talk a bit about Trump and his do your part on allies in a later part of the show. It's great you mentioned the Indo-Pacific. In the larger context of that, Barb, the focus was on Xi Jinping. Harris accused Trump of being too soft and close to Xi, even quoting his thank you tweet during the pandemic. We've also seen her put the China threat even ahead of Ukraine and Israel in her recent A New Way Forward policy release. Kharis, what do you feel is behind Harris's push to bring China out front and center?
Well, I think it's ultimately U.S. national interest. The United States is in a long-term competition with China for economic and global leadership now.
But has there been a change, like, say, from Biden or the Obama administration, where many in Taiwan have had this impression that, for right or for wrong, that Democrats are a bit soft on China when it comes to the Republicans?
Well, I think there's actually been a lot of continuity between the Trump administration and the Biden administration's approach to China. If anything, Trump really shifted most dramatically from what Obama was doing. And then Biden has, I would say, consolidated a lot of the initial changes that happened under the Trump administration, and in some cases pushed them even further forward. So I would not characterize this administration as soft on China at all.
And as both of you are experts on Asian security, Kharis mentioned how U.S. and China competition has been going on for quite some time. What do you feel China policy will be in terms of what voters think when they're at the ballot box in November? Is that a big consideration? Fang-yu?
First of all, foreign policy is not always a very important one in the elections. People tend to be more concerned on the housing price, wages, and economy issues. The economy issue is always the most important one. So the foreign policy may not play a very important role. But this time, I mean, the China issue, the Ukraine issue, and other issues are often mentioned. So maybe, yeah, some of the voters will pay attention to that, but it's still not the most important factor. Yeah.
You mentioned that kitchen table issues are more top and center in terms of what voters are considering. Kharis, what do you think, with that in mind, given that it's not the number one issue, will you see, whether it's Trump or Harris, become harder on China? Or do you feel there would be a significant policy change when it comes to China?
It's hard to know about either of them for sure, because neither one has a kind of clearly defined China policy in waiting. I think with Harris, we can make a prediction with a stronger degree of certainty that she'll continue more or less what the Biden administration is doing, perhaps with some adjustment around the edges, but the current approach to embrace partners and allies and try to build a coalition of countries that have been bullied by China and are facing existential threats or challenges from China in some cases. To build a coalition to cooperate against China will be, I imagine, her administration's goal if she wins. With Trump, I don't quite know what to expect. There were parts of a very kind of hostile approach in his first term towards China, but then he was also trying to make a deal with Xi Jinping and get them to buy more U.S. soybeans. And so I don't know whether you're going to get the deal maker Trump or the Trump who sees China as the reason he lost re-election in 2020.
So what do you say to those who say that Trump's uncertainty is actually an asset because it makes allies or adversaries actually more hesitant to take action?
Well, I don't think it's a good thing when your allies don't trust you or are uncertain about what you would do. And that's particularly true in Taiwan, where uncertainty about the U.S. commitment leads to, fatalism, to calls for greater détente or rapprochement across the strait. And it also leads to greater skepticism of the United States in Taiwan. And so my own view is that we should be fairly clear about our interests and our values in this relationship going forward.
Fang-yu, does China take advantage of that with, say, Trump's unexpectedness and say if there's a doubt cast on U.S. commitment to the defense of Taiwan?
I think the Chinese government is still facing a lot of uncertainties if there is a second Trump administration. So that is for sure. However, they can utilize what Trump is saying, especially his transactional comments on Taiwan, and also his very hostile to the Taiwan's chip industry. And this can be a very major materials for the Chinese propaganda on social media and TikToks. We have already seen a lot to use these of resources to raise up the so-called U.S. skepticism. So even if Trump has a different kind of policies and he has a team, but what he said will become a major source for the U.S. skepticism, for sure.
Speaking of Taiwanese concerns, we talked about the Trump side. Let's talk a bit about the Harris side. When her candidacy was announced, and we also saw in almost a decade a visit by U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan to China, meeting with them, its senior leaders, and there was news in Taiwan with some concern here saying that the Democrats are once again cozying up to China. What do you say to that?
I don't think that is any sign that the Democrats close into China. So first of all, the U.S. is trying to so-called manage the competition because no one wants to see a direct conflicts between the great powers. So the management of the U.S.-China policy has been a long-term policy. Even under the Trump administration, the administration always want to have these dialogues between the high-level officials. So I think it's a good sign that China is willing to host the top U.S. official to talk everything. That can maybe to change lower the tension between the two powers, and also because the election is closer, so maybe China is willing to manage. Also, they want to manage these things to calm down every tension, to avoid that the China issue become a salient issue in the U.S. election. So that's, I think, the major concern of China.
Speaking of China policy, Kharis, the Trump administration actually started tariffs on China, and we've seen this carried on with the Biden-Harris administration. Right. If either candidate wins, do you think this would intensify?
I think it's possible that under either candidate, if they win, these tariffs could be intensified, so they could be increased or expanded. Trump himself has pledged to put 100% tariff on most, if not all, goods coming out of China. I think in practice that raises some real economic concerns for the United States. For one, the U.S. has just come through a major bout of inflation. Inflation is finally down now to more reasonable levels, but 100% tariff on every good imported from China is going to raise the price of almost everything in the U.S. So I suspect there's going to be kind of a fight over these tariffs if there's an attempt to put a blanket charge on everything coming in. The Biden administration, I should note, has also kept most of the Trump tariffs in place and is even talking about expanding the size and the scope of some of those tariffs. And so Harris, she's part of the Biden administration now. If she is elected, it's possible that she could do that as well, or carry through with that.
And in the case if those tariffs actually do increase, as Kharis mentioned, Fang-yu, do you feel that could impact Taiwan? In the first wave, we saw many companies move from China to Taiwan as a part of that.
Well, there's good and bad. So first of all, we see that Taiwan and all over the world just lower their foreign direct investment to China and move to other countries, especially Taiwan and other East Asian countries. So we receive a lot of benefit from these kind of policies. However, we still have a lot of Taiwanese businessmen have their investment in China in the long run. So they also suffer from this kind of reshuffle. So I think the market will find its own way to have their own solutions.
but it's definitely not a negative or something that Taiwan should be concerned about.
Yep. It depends on what the products are. I mean, Taiwan does source a fair amount of stuff from mainland China to put into their own products that then get shipped out of Taiwan. And so depending on the kinds of export controls that the U.S. may put in place or the kind of requirements for local content that are put in place, that could force Taiwanese manufacturers to source from other sources, and that might raise the cost of things.
As we've seen concerns from certain chip makers.
Yeah,
as well,
very much. And so I think we're playing with a very complex system here with these tariffs and the proposals for technology controls and local content requirements. And so it gets very complicated very quickly, and it's kind of hard to predict in advance how these things will play out in a global market.
Let's talk a bit about the election. Going back to the debate, post-debate polls show Trump losing to Harris. However, despite winning only one poll in the last 8 years, Trump still managed to beat Hillary Clinton at the ballot box in 2016. But also with the debates, we saw Biden withdraw after his devastating debate performance. Kharis, I'll turn back to you again. How impactful do you feel these debates are, as we've seen a post-bump with Harris with the new Reuters poll with her polling at 47% to Trump at 42, 5-point lead?
Yeah, so we're just a couple days after the initial debate, and so it's hard to see what the long-term effect is. Traditionally in U.S. politics, debates don't matter a whole lot. So there's about a 3-week kind of decay of the effect. It's large in the beginning, and then things revert back to the kind of steady state situation they were in before the debate. That said, we're in an almost really an unprecedented election year for the United States. We have an incumbent president who withdrew from his own reelection campaign, and the vice presidential candidate is now taking his place. And we have a former president who's now returning as the Republican candidate and trying to reclaim the presidency. And so the effect of the debate could be more important in this case, particularly for Harris, I think, because she was so little known among the electorate at large, even though she was vice president. Her negatives and positives were both quite low while she was still vice president, and so she has a lot of room to grow in terms of approval. And I think the performance that she had on Tuesday night in the debate was close to the upper end of expectations for what she would be able to do there. And so that may have solidified a more positive image among a critical slice of the electorate. We'll see.
Let's now turn back to Taiwan. I spoke earlier to Wang Dingyu, legislator from the ruling DPP, on U.S.-wide bipartisan consensus when it comes to the threat that China poses. Wang is also on the legislature's Foreign and National Defense Committee.
They want to establish their own norm. They don't follow international regulation. They steal technology. They using spy. They using hybrid warfare. Sometimes even using disinformation to harass or try to interfere democracy's process. So what I observe here is all the leaders in Democrats and also in Republicans, they all notice this, and they put this on very priority in their list, to deal with. And Taiwan is a little bit off hook from that. In the past, Taiwan issue and the Chinese issue always linked together. But now Taiwan is some kind, I have to say it's a good development. The United States start to think Taiwan's role in global politics and Taiwan's important role in supply chain is reliable and crucial.
Let's also hear from Victor Chin, KMT U.S. representative, Taiwan's largest opposition party. Chin spoke to me about what it takes to deter China and where Taiwan is at when it comes to that.
The military intimidation from mainland China has increased. We see the encirclement of warplanes, even warships around Taiwan waters. That's really destabilizing the region. And I think in that regard, we have a very deep conversation with decision makers in Washington, D.C. I think you have to be across the board increase of our defense capabilities. Yes, we need to buy hardwares from the United States to increase our military equipment. But on the other hand, on the software side, what I mean is that the training and the joint exercises, cooperation with the U.S. military is equally important. Very recently, we see that there's an extension of military service from 4 months to 1 year. And you need time to prepare those young recruits into having combat capabilities.
Kharis, Chen spoke about U.S. arms to Taiwan, and there currently is a delay, and this comes top of the mind of people in Taiwan and also Taiwanese American voters. Mm-hmm. How do you feel the administration will address this? Should a new administration come in, or do you feel if Trump becomes president, there would be a change in terms of arms deliveries?
Well, I think we should clarify that the delay here is not equally across all of the different arms packages that have been sold to Taiwan. It's predominantly the F-16s package. And there's some Stingers and Harpoons that have been slightly delayed as well. But the backlog is nowhere near what's often reported, which is in the range of 20 billion. It's actually under 10 billion in terms of a formal delay of delivery. And then I actually think this administration has made speeding up the delivery a top priority in the relationship. I think there's a lot of man hours going into this problem in the Pentagon and over at the National Security Council. And I would expect that to continue under an administration of either of the current presidential candidates.
Fang-yu, do you feel that Taiwan's doing enough in terms of, we talked earlier about Trump, you talked about how he asked more from allies. Do you feel that Taiwan is showing that it's doing enough, as we saw from Chin and also from Wang, where they spoke about Taiwan's beefing up its own self-defense?
Well, Taiwan's defense budget has increased from its GDP ratio from 2% to 2.5% in the last 5-6 years. And 2.5% is significantly higher than the average of NATO countries. So the NATO countries spend about 2%. And only 5 or 6 of the 32 NATO countries have the higher ratio than Taiwan. So Taiwan has already just spent a lot of efforts to raise this defense budget, that is for sure. And also, Taiwan has to do more to speed up all of the military reforms. So, for example, we have already resumed our conscription system. However, I think Taiwan should do more to increase the quality of the training programs. And the U.S. is now having a public program. I mean, we can see all of the news publicly that the U.S. and Taiwan has these cooperations. That is not, we haven't seen this before because everything is on the table. But now we have the very positive and very public views on how the U.S. and Taiwan is now cooperating on this.
Kharis, let me turn to you. The Hoover institutions in which you are a part of, and you have a leadership role there. How does Taiwan's commitment compare to the current PRC threat? Do you think Taiwan's doing enough?
No, I think Taiwan needs to do more. The threat has really escalated in recent years, and I think the overwhelming consensus, not just at my institution, but among China watchers in the security space in the U.S., is that Taiwan is lagging in its efforts to respond to the escalation in threat. That said, as someone who studies this issue pretty closely in Taiwan, I think there's some kind of built-in structural barriers to moving quickly on this issue, and the current government and the previous Tsai administration has tried to chip away at these issues, and so I do think things are moving in the right direction.
Kharis, how do you feel in terms of Taiwan working closer with whoever becomes the next president in terms of having China threat and with North Korea and all these different security issues that the U.S. is dealing with? What is the best approach for Taiwan?
The United States is also pretty stretched in its international commitments. the fact that there's an ongoing conflict in the Middle East. There's a significant conflict in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, and the United States is spending a lot of time and energy and some resources in both of those conflicts as well. And it means that a significant amount of U.S. Military capability is perhaps not as present as we might like in the Western Pacific. And so these other conflicts around the world do have a kind of secondary impact on Taiwan's own security. And so it's worth it to our Taiwanese viewers, I think, to become more educated about what's happening in the rest of the world. Second, the United States, in my view, still has a compelling national interest in ensuring that peace is preserved across the Taiwan Strait, regardless of who the next president is. But it is not in the United States' interest to see Taiwan kind of push the envelope on symbolic issues like changing the name of the country or the constitution or the flag or those kinds of things. It's also worth noting that the potential for political uncertainty in Beijing is not zero either. There's some challenges that Xi Jinping faces now that are as large as any that he's faced over his more than 10 years in power, in particular the Chinese economy. So I think vigilance is the order of the day.
Thank you very much for both of your insights today.
Thanks for having us.
If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show. Stay safe, and see you next time.